Publishing has its own risks where you are hoping that the game kind of grows upon people and they start being addicted to that. Publishing revolves around addiction and platform revolves around publishers. So that is where the dependency directly falls upon the publishers. Yes, it kind of mitigates the risk when you have literally a buffet full of games on your platform. So kind of you are, unfortunately, most of the publishers that India thrives on today are non-Indian publishers, right? So it is also a larger challenge to kind of deal with, international entities to make sure that you still get on the right side of the licensing and everything to get a game on board and start organizing tournaments for that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator Podcast. It's me, Roshan Karyappa. If you're new here, we curate conversations with founders, operators, and investors in the Indian startup ecosystem. So learn the nuances of sales, product, marketing, engineering, what have you, to really know how to build and scale that hyper-growth startup. On this episode, we speak to Soham Thacker, who is the founder of Gamerji. Gamerji is India's largest online esports gaming platform with over 4 million users, and they conduct about 400 tournaments or so every day. I'd speak to Soham about growth, acquisition, monetization, and plenty of other things related to the gaming sector, including the new regulation that's been mooted as well. Soham is an old hand. He's been an entrepreneur for over 10 years now, and he's had a couple of other ventures as well. We speak about some of the lessons he's learned along the way and how to build a sustainable business as well. This was a fun conversation, and I hope you like it. But before we dive in, if you are a returning visitor, don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite platforms. It really helps more people discover us. Well, without further ado, here is Soham of Gamerji. Hey Soham, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Of course, thank you so much, Roshan, for having me here.
Yeah, I've been really curious about the space. Like I mentioned, I know nothing about gaming other than the fact that about 10 or 12 years back, I tried to organize a session in the NASCOM product conclave on gaming, and man, it was such a fight to even find people invested in the space, right? I mean, who are doing something about it. Of course, that has changed a great deal over the last 10 years. I mean, we've seen gaming and especially mobile gaming and so on explode over the last 2-3 years, especially, right? I mean, so I'm really curious to learn more about this space. It seems very, very interesting. But before that, I mean, I'd like to take a step back and talk about your journey itself. You've been a founder for a good number of years now, almost a decade or more, I should say. And you've been in different spaces as well. You've been in the food and beverage space and then now in gaming. If you were to sort of abstract yourself out of this circumstance and look at the last 10 years in perspective, what are some 2 or 3 lessons you've learned from this founding journey?
Well, multiple, to be very honest. Starting from the initial days when I just moved back from the States here and was literally trying to understand how to get things started, how does a company get formed. Literally, it was those 101s that had to be understood, and not only from a statutory purposes, but also from a second, like how to find the right set of people, how to develop a team, how to find the right co-founder, what industry, how to make the right, how to fill the right gap in the industry. If it's a product-based industry, how to make the most valuable product. How to test the market, how to understand your customer. So many things that went into, obviously experience taught me a lot, rather than just, literally reading it out of the books. But to be honest, the primary learnings that I got were people skills. Honestly, it's something like how you actually manage and work a team. I mean, yes, before this I was employed, in the tech space, but that's a very different structure where you are working under an umbrella where you are literally a very small fish of a big pond and you are exactly given your do's and don'ts, and you work in a very, so to say, a dedicated, structured, curated environment versus as a startup founder, here you are in the ocean figuring out where everything is going to take you. And that's where having a good team and a right set of people with me made a lot of difference, and something that I'm still learning how to manage the right set of people in the right set of manner, but it's something that I learned over these years.
Yeah. So one of the founders that I spoke to told me that, starting up is very simple. You get the right people together and you enable them, and that's it. More get out of the way. But that is, simple as they say, is not easy, and that is the hardest lesson, perhaps, right?
Absolutely.
What are some of the hardest lessons you've learned? I mean, what was really really tough? Because I suppose
I
all of
think
us have
the
certain things that is hard for us.
I think the hardest lesson that I learned you never learned enough when you are in a startup which is doing well. You start learning more and more when in startups that don't do well, right? So before the FNB and Gamerji, of course, I ran another startup which was like an online service marketplace. And what I realized and the biggest learning I got from there was, not everything that works in the West is going to work here. And not everything works as you deem or you imagine it to. Sometimes, a lot of times, we founders, what the mistake we make is we imagine the customer as the near and dear ones that we know. But India, obviously, as a market, is a very diverse space. So the biggest challenge, or so to say, the mistake that I made was not understanding the right customer mind space. Not understanding the customer needs. Sometimes you feel like having, making golden rims is the best way out, but are people really going to put golden rims on your cars? That is something that, you need to understand your customer behavior and their needs. It's something that, I learned it the hard way, and fortunately now I did.
Yeah. No, I think finding those first 5, 10, maybe 50 unaffiliated users slash customers, right, who are happy about your product, and not just happy, I mean, who are willing to pay for your product, is just so critical in order for you to battle test the idea and the hypothesis. All right, let's talk about gaming, right? I mean, why did you decide to start up in this space? I mean, aside from the fact that, of course, I mean, I suppose you're an avid gamer yourself, right? What about the market appealed to you?
See, being an avid gamer was just the start. Having passion towards a particular industry or a particular space is something which is fair. But other than that, the biggest gap that I realized and also and I also could foresee that gaming, the way, the pace at which it was picking up, obviously the entire telecom revolution with data speeds, the entire shift towards mobile, the accessibility of the games, the kind of publishers that were stepping in the Indian market and looking at it very seriously to promote the entire gaming infrastructure is something that I started studying. This was towards late 17, early 18 is when I started to kind of really take this space as seriously as it was. And with that, I realized that there were, especially in the esports side, there was nothing that was catering to aspiring gamers. Like, how you look at any other conventional sport, you will always have a ladder that reaches up to the top, right? If you're a cricketer, for example, you start playing literally under your building and then to in local community tournaments, and then it kind of journey goes up to all the way up to becoming a professional. That entire pathway was not existent for gaming or esports. And ideally speaking, that is where it drove me towards starting an esports platform which catered to the millions and millions of people who really sit anywhere and everywhere on their mobile devices and play. You will see people sitting outside coffee shops or outside colleges or literally on the comfort of their bedrooms gaming. And I thought that having a cater and provide a tournament level experience literally in their bedrooms was something that I wanted.
So you chose to be a platform instead of a publisher. I think intuitively a lot of us are aware of the challenges of being a publisher, right? I mean, surely it's like a dogfight of a market there, right? The shelf life for games is really, really low, and finding users, more importantly, retaining users, and even more importantly, earning any money at all from those users is a huge challenge. What are some challenges of running a platform?
Well, few different challenges, right? A platform has its dependencies. Has as the publishing has its own risks, where you are hoping that the game kind of grows upon people and they start being addicted to that. Publishing revolves around addiction, and platform revolves around publishers. So that is where the dependency directly falls upon the publishers. Yes, it kind of mitigates the risk when you have literally a buffet full of games on your platform. So kind of you are diversifying the risk there. But then again, when you run a platform, there is a lot of dependency on the publisher, the games, the popularity of the games, the kind of technical access, the kind of intellectual as well as technical integrations that the publishers are willing to do with you. So a lot of it depends on that. And then unfortunately, most of the publishers that India thrives on today are non-Indian publishers, right? So it is also a larger challenge to kind of deal with international entities to make sure that you still get on the right side of the licensing and everything to get a game on board and start organizing tournaments for that. So that those are certain challenges that a platform does face. And then like any other space, it also has risk versus rewards. So fortunately, it paid off.
Right. So with that background, let's talk about Gamerji, right? As I understand, it's an esports platform, and the niche that you operate in is sort of semi-professional or amateur gamers as such, right? So can you talk to us a little more about how you've grown over the last 2-3 years?
So where we started probably 6 to 7 months before COVID. We started around October 2019, and the thing with that was that we started with only the first two games which are popular in the country. We started with PUBG, which was obviously existent back then, and Clash Royale. These were the first two games we started with, and then started hosting tournaments. Then obviously, as the industry started to grow, and then COVID obviously played a huge part in gaming becoming a mainstream form of entertainment in those unfortunate 12 to 18 months that we all suffered throughout the globe. We saw a lot of organic traction grow. I mean, literally, in February 2020, we were sitting at 100,000 people on the platform. Come, roughly about August, we're sitting at 1 million people on the platform. So that is the kind of traction boost that we saw. And with that, obviously, there was a lot of conviction that also started building in the investment space. Ideally, the venture capitals, even angel investors, they started believing in gaming as the next industry. And as we stand today, we are hosting more than 6.5 million people on the platform, catering to 24 games, which we host tournaments for. And so it's been a good journey with a lot of learning curves, with a lot of iterations as well on the platform during COVID times, post COVID times, how to kind of face those challenges. IP bans like the likes of PUBG is being banned a couple of times already. So it's been a lot of learning and a roller coaster ride, and fortunately we have sailed across.
Right. So, what goes into hosting a tournament? I understand that you host something like 400 tournaments a day, or
Correct.
perhaps more. And you mentioned, you have 20 plus titles and so on, right? And 6.5 million users, which is amazing, right? So, what goes into hosting one of these tournaments?
Well, ideally, what there are a couple of things that go into it. One is when a tournament, or ideally what we call as scrims, which are like daily small tournaments that we host on our platform. When we host them, they are this directly are live on the platform itself, and then the users can go and participate in those tournaments. Once they participate in that tournament, automatically before the time of the tournament, they are provided with a unique link ID and a password which they use to join the game on the respective publisher's platform. Once they play the game there, we fetch the data back on our platform and we declare the winners. So that's how ideally a process of a user journey kind of works. And then they get gratified on our platform using virtual currency, which they can redeem for our brand partner vouchers. So that's how the whole user journey of a tournament works. And then obviously they can keep building their stats. They can throw multiple challenges to other people, improvise upon their levels, check their performances on the past tournaments, and kind of improvise upon that. So it gives them a good platform for them to not only be gratified but also learn and kind of evolve and hopefully get scouted and become a professional gamer.
Right. And I would assume that you'll have like a pot as such, right? Everyone kind of contributes to that, and maybe you have a corporate sponsor who will kind of add to that pot, perhaps, and the
No,
winner
we
gets.
we don't work on the pod or the RMG structure. We work ideally as a subscription based platform. So you subscribe on a platform, you get certain virtual tokens which you can use, like similar to how we do it in an arcade. You buy like a monthly pass or a weekly pass, or you can also choose game wise passes, and then you can pay a number of tournaments using those passes for it. And then as you start winning in those tournaments, you can accumulate points which you can redeem from our rewards store.
Can you give us a basic understanding of the economics that work? I mean, like, you have X number of people subscribing, and then you will perhaps give out some amount of, tournament prices and so on. So, how does that economics work?
So the way the economics works is that when you subscribe for a particular platform, the you are allocated a certain number of games that you can play, or you can subscribe on a higher package where you can play n number of games. Now, essentially, the duration of a game completely depends. It varies from game to game. So the way the economics works is that we calculate into perception that what is the average number of games a user plays on a daily basis with a subscribed user, and then versus obviously the price pool, the point distribution along with the reward store. They are calculated accordingly so that obviously the net comes out to you. So that is how the whole algorithm also runs. Depending on the filling ratios, automatically the reward ratios get readjusted, and so does the redeeming ratio gets readjusted. So at the end, the conversion factor from coins into the actual voucher value kind of stays into gross margin.
Right, right. You mentioned 6.5 million users, right? I mean, what changes when you go from 100K to a million to 4 million and now 6.5 million?
Besides the
Right.
server
What are
bills, a
those
lot of
things?
things. But initially, when we started as a manual platform. Right? Literally, we'd have two, three guys sitting there hosting the tournament, checking whether the people who have registered are the ones playing. Then you start working on developing tools and technology towards it. Right? I mean, you have to start building AI. You have to start building softwares which automatically analyze those for you. And then you have to reduce your manual dependency, whether it be from a tournament organization standpoint or whether it be also from a customer care standpoint. You have to keep iterating those things, and that's where we started developing the technological solutions for the same. And that's how we, obviously from 100K users where you're hosting probably 20, 30 games a day to 6.5 million people, where you have to host more than 500 tournaments a day. It requires a completely evolution in technology or that a company has to go through.
Right. And can you take us through some of the levers in terms of growth and customer acquisition? I mean, I understand digital would be like a big channel for you, right?
Absolutely. Digital is one of it, yes. We also work very closely with the influencer network, ideally in the gaming influencer network. We also work very closely with college ambassadors. So we also have campus ambassadors across more than 500 plus colleges now across the country, where we popularize our tournament, our brand using the offline network as well. And then cross tournament branding kind of takes place. So we work with a lot of tournament organizers, which ideally host the pro leagues, also develop a lot of content. So we work with them as well. So it's a mix of obviously direct digital marketing plus some innovative marketing campaigns that we run online and offline.
Now, I mentioned earlier that it's really tough to compete in the gaming space, right? I mean, there's just so many brands vying for your attention. How do you think about building something like a long-lasting moat of sorts, right? I mean, how do you differentiate yourself from the other players in the market as such?
So see, when it comes to core esports, fortunately, the market is still very young and core evolving. I mean, the RMG space, the fantasy, the poker, the rummy spaces, they have been there existing for quite some time now. But when you talk about core esports, when you talk about direct title based gaming or direct first person gaming, where you are actually playing actively, is something which is still growing. It's still in its very very early stages. Fortunately, so we had that, so to say, a first or a second movers advantage back in the day. And then when you can only grow your moat as you start automatizing the process. If you are still heavily dependent on just a user base, it's not going to be scalable. To build technology and tools along with it, which help you scale faster, is something where a company can create it. Just having users under your belt is just not going to be enough going down.
I know that you mentioned, in terms of organizing tournaments and automating some of that bit, but could you give us a little more of a deeper perspective into some of the tools and technologies that you've had to build as you've scaled?
Well, giving you a smaller example, like for example, when you host a tournament, there are 100 people who have registered, for example, on a tournament, and then then there's an ID and a password which is floated to join that particular tournament. There's more likely and not that gets circulated to your friend. If you're sitting right literally next to your friend, he's going to know about it, and he's going to also try and enter that game directly on the publisher's page. Now, to build a tool which automatically kicks that person who is not registered out and only allow the registered users to play is something which cannot be done manually. Every time someone cannot be sitting and literally matching a sheet with the people saying that, okay, these are the exact number of people and these are the people registered or not registered, right? So just giving a small example, there has to be a software created which automatically manages that for you, which does the direct processing with your system and maps it out on the publisher's side so that you have that. Second being said, also fetching the results directly. You again, those gone are the days when you actually had people uploading screenshot and then someone manually grazing them through and then declaring the winners, right? Gone are those days. Let's start using technology to automatize that. So these are small examples of the kind of tools that need to be developed to automatize the entire process.
What is your experience of working with these publishers, right? I mean, of course, with 6.5 million users, you have some leverage. But let's say, in the initial stages, what were those interactions like? And yeah, could you also give us a sense of how, what their priorities are and how to work with them?
So to work with them, there are very simple things. First, you need to be transparent with them, adhere to their guidelines, never violate the IP policies. See, indirectly, you are working with them to also popularize their game and provide more traction for their game as well, right? So it is kind of a win-win situation for both the publisher and the platform. A platform drives user to the game, whereas the game provides the backbone to for a platform to exist. It's been a smoother ride. I mean, we have never faced any, so to say, challenges, in speaking with the publishers. Yes, especially when you talk about international publishers, it might take a little longer for the approval processes and all of them to come through, especially during the initial days, because it's very hard to kind of maneuver and get to the right person in a larger organization to get the right set of licenses, etc., etc. But as obviously now we stand as a little more traction oriented platform, those relations have been built, and fortunately now it's easier for us to onboard newer games on.
Right. You started expanding globally as well, right? I mean, you started
Yeah, we
moving
just
into the
recently
Middle
launched
East.
in UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. So, what are you doing differently there versus here in India? I mean,
Well,
again, I
it's
mean, you're
still
digital first, but
we are still in the early days of those markets. Still understanding the user behavior, still understanding the customer base. The games that are popular here not necessarily are the same games that are popular there. So it's still understanding the market that is taking place. Though we have managed to start seeing a good amount of traction there, especially in the initial days. We have reached about 35 tournaments a day in UAE and Saudi combined. But that is again a learning curve that is going on. We're still building the partnerships with the influencers, still figuring out the right mediums of marketing. So it's like when you expand geographically, it's very important. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't want to make the same mistake by not understanding my consumer behavior, not understanding my consumer needs. So it's very critical for us to understand that before we go all out on the marketing spends there. So that is something where we are at today.
how do you manage to stay close to the user and customer, as you expand? Because you could sometimes look at the 6.5 million number as just digits on a screen, but then how do you really understand your users? I mean, do you have time slots in the day when you talk to people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I talk to minimum 50 users a week, minimum, since day one. Since day one, I make sure, and obviously I don't talk as a myself, I talk as a representative of the company, but I just, do calls. Also, especially if I find some time, I do listen to some distress calls as well to the CRM, to make sure that I understand what their real pain points are, whether it's not getting to join, whether it is too many or too little games that are offered. Those are learnings where, and the only way to stay closest to your customer is to directly interact with them. I mean, yes, the data points are good, you can see the numbers and everything, but to really understand your consumer, it's best to directly face them head on, and that's what I have been practicing so far. It's always necessary to keep looking at the numbers and see what those also speak. But gone are the days where you can just make a gut feel call on your business. You have to rely on data somewhere.
No, for sure. I think you have to back your data with some qualitative conversations as well, right? I mean, we sort of tend to overestimate dashboards and reports and whatnot. But yeah, having those 50 conversations might give you a lot more perspective and help you understand the nuances.
Correct.
Now, gaming is one of those spaces where the regulation has been slightly ambiguous, right? You had a bunch of things happen over the last couple of years in terms of bans and whatnot. But Ministry of Electronics and IT has come out yesterday with a draft regulation, right? I'm sure that you might have had a quick look at it.
Yeah, I did.
Would you want to talk to us about a few of the features and so on?
So, see, the first draft that has come out is still focusing on customer validation, customer privacy. The core issues are still to be addressed. The do's and don'ts are still to be kind of drafted and laid out. I think still the ministry is focused on the more developed, so to say, segments of the industry, where ideally, the real money or the pseudo betting space is where it's more focused on, rather than a non RMG based platform, or ideally a gaming tournament platform versus, like I said, a poker rummy fantasy platform. So that is, it's definitely a very positive move that the government is taking it seriously and actually making steps towards regularizing a lot of things in the industry, in gaming in general. But only time will tell if whatever the regulations are put forth are towards the growth, or kind of hindering it somewhere. Keeping our fingers crossed and hoping for the best.
Yeah, but I think the government has also acknowledged that there's a huge market potential in this space, and so they want to do this regulation in a very proactive way. And from a founder perspective, I think ambiguity sucks, right? I mean, nobody wants that. I mean, as long as you define the black and white, I mean, you can
No,
operate
it's always
reasonably.
it's always best to have black and white. Living in the gray space is always dangerous. I'm glad that at least we are hoping in the next probably 12 to 18 months we'll have a lot of regulations that kind of define the industry, and also a lot of government initiatives, hopefully, which kind of boost the industry as a whole.
Right. So, having executed in the space over the last 3 or 4 years, lived and breathed it, what are some nuances of executing in the gaming space? For someone who wants to start up in the domain, right? What are those practitioners' secrets that you have learned that comes from hard knuckles execution?
I mean, honestly, there are no secrets, right? It's like any other. It is exactly like any other industry. It requires you to find a gap. It requires you to develop a good product. It requires you to understand your customer. It requires you to build a good team. It requires you to provide good service day in and day out. Build longer lasting products. Keep your costs under control. I mean, those are the basic things. The most important thing about the gaming space is decide which, even gaming as an industry is used. There are a lot of subsects of it. It's like saying, like, I want to join sports industry. But then what are you going to do? Are you going to be working in broadcasting? Are you going to be working as a coach? Are you going to be working as I don't know, a pitch curator? How would you want to associate with that industry becomes very important, right? So that is where, even when you talk about gaming as an industry in general, whether you want to be a game developer, an animation artist, or, a gamer or a content creator, there's a lot, or literally, start a platform, become an entrepreneur, work in, broadcasting and production, which revolves around gaming. So or literally the event space also today. So it's very important that as a founder or an entrepreneur, if you're looking at a business, it's very important for you to decide which parameter of the industry you're going to take upon. I mean, you can't just generically be like, "Oh, I'm in the gaming industry," right? Like how you asked me, like, what is the difference between working as a publisher versus working as a platform? Because though both of us are in the gaming space, there's very different challenges, very different business models that both the segments work in. So that's that my suggestion would be very clear, that decide on which subsect of the industry you want to kind of fill the gap in, and you see the most business potential.
So we're also operating in less than optimal times, right? I mean, the market has turned. We're heading into a recession of sorts. What are you doing differently during this slowdown? And what would be your advice to fellow entrepreneurs who are listening?
Well, go back to the conventional route of business, right? Cash burning is not cool. Revenues have to be a focus. Even in the gaming space, which requires you to grow very fast, keep your costs under control. It's very easy to spend on marketing left, right, and center. And experimentation can be a part of it. Funds are not going to come easy. VCs are not just sitting there just to give money to you. They also are smart enough to know whether you're going somewhere or not. Being a startup founder and just securing or raising a capital is not the end of the journey, it's the starting of the journey. Right? So especially in these times, don't depend on you raising funds. Make business models which are sustainable, and hopefully we all see it through in greens, and get out of the recession in a way which in turn boosts the economy in nowhere.
Awesome. So before we end the conversation, any books or podcasts that you would recommend?
Honestly, I'm not a big big reader on books, and podcasts. Most of the podcasts that I listen to are gaming podcasts. But I don't know if I should be promoting, but the latest book that I read was Ashneer Grover's Dogla,
Oh.
and I mean a lot of things I could relate to. A lot of things I thought that this were nothing that, though he suggests you should. I mean, being a different person, I thought that this is not something I would ever do. But a worth read. It has a good entrepreneurial entertainment value to it. So yeah, I mean, it can be a good read while you are just waiting for a flight. But that's about it.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Soham. This was fascinating. Like I said, I had no idea about the space as such, right? I've learned a little more today thanks to you, and wish you all the best for everything that's coming up.
Thank you so much, Roshan. It was a pleasure talking to you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, consider subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform. Also get updates delivered straight to your WhatsApp inbox by clicking on the link in the description.